Hey everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at two Stephen King books, Under the Dome, which came out in 2009, I listened to it through an audiobook, and his latest release, Fairy Tale. And we're going to be starting with Under the Dome. Under the Dome takes place in Stephen King's, fictional Maine topography, in the small town of Chester Mills. And this town has found itself in quite the ordeal, because it has seemingly been trapped in an unpenetrable dome. And this is a problem for a number of reasons. Yes, nothing can get in and out of basic functions of any town are starting to fall apart. They're going to run out of food, they're going to run out of water. The pollution of the town can't escape. It's just building all at the top of the dome, making things look super gross and weird. The people of the town can't seem to do anything about it. The US government and military seemingly can't do anything about it. It's a very, very dire situation. Especially for Dale Barbara, or Barbie, our mostly main central character we follow, who at the start of the story, right before the dome falls, is trying to get out of Dodge. After some local disputes, there are a lot of people in Chester Mills who don't particularly like him, so he was just trying to peace out. And then the dome came down. But it's actually not terrible news for everyone. Of course, you have Big Jim Ready, who is one of the town's selectmen, someone who is very popular, but is also a bit of a sketchy, corrupt dude. And after the initial fall of the dome actually leaves quite a few people dead, Jim sort of steps up into a leadership position and decides that some things need to be changed. So this story mostly follows two different factions, Barbie and his allies, and Big Jim and his allies, as Big Jim is sort of on a conquest for power to get everyone in the town on his side, get everyone to believe his lies and conspiracies, and essentially he wants to be a king. Why? Because he's an egotistical piece of shit. And then Barbie's gang, who are a bit more concerned with, figuring out what the heck is going on and, surviving. So yeah, they go around, they learn some stuff, they clash with Big Jim a lot, and things quickly, as you would imagine, devolve into absolute chaos. Now, for those who don't know, this is a very large book. Stephen King has, I believe, 3 books that are over 1,000 pages in length, and this is one of them. Yes, along with The Stand and It, this marks one of Stephen King's most epic and ambitious tomes. So you know how The Stand introduces us to the apocalypse right away? Under the Dome is a really, really slow version of that. And not really in a bad way. What I mean is that you're presented with this instant apocalyptic scenario. You know what this dome means for these people if it stays there. And we spend a lot of time learning about the different people of this town, what their lives were like before, what their lives are like now, how the dome affects everything, and how it affects them now that it has fallen. Now, for myself and a lot of people, Stephen King's biggest strength has always been his character work. He's so good at crafting just these believable, relatable, exceptionally well-developed characters who feel like they existed long before the story, and they'll exist long after, assuming they survive. And he does a fantastic job building out this small town with all sorts of different characters, different locations that you just really buy into and believe that these people have lived there their whole lives. He's so good at it. It's been done in a bunch of his stories before, and he's pretty much a master of it at this point. By the end, I felt like I was as familiar with this town as I was places like Derry or Castle Rock. And when it comes to the actual narrative, it's also really interesting as well. A lot of these people under the dome have their secrets and have their demons. And the dome is sort of bringing everything out to the forefront. There are a lot of wild turns this book takes. It's full of politics and betrayal and suspense and danger. And it, of course, is all tied together by this underlying mystery of what the dome actually is, where it came from, and can it be taken down. And I thought King did a really great job with all of these aspects. But at the end of the day, I don't really think this book came close to It or The Stand or a lot of other classic Stephen King books I have read. And a lot of that mostly comes down to the pacing. Whereas, his other 1,000-pagers, I never wanted them to end. There was so much detail and it all felt so important. When it comes to Under the Dome, while I do appreciate how much detail Stephen King puts into a lot of his descriptions of the characters and events and just everything going on, I do think a lot of it here felt a bit more redundant than normal. There were a lot of characters we learn about, a lot of things that happen that I really did not think needed to be developed as much as they were, because a lot of it feels sort of pointless in the end. There's just a lot of fluff and padding here that, while I never really hated it, there were definitely points of this book where I felt went on way too long. Like, they'll talk about events and like big portions of the book that are coming up that I'm really excited for, but it can just take so long to get there, and not everything leading up to that point is interesting. But when the big moments do happen, all of the big climaxes, especially the final climax, the book still really shows that Stephen King knows his stuff. So yeah, overall I was pretty happy with this book and did enjoy it a great deal. I'd still give it a 4 stars despite my issues with the pacing, because King is just so good at taking a bunch of wonderfully realized characters, throwing them into a horrible situation, and just watching the flames erupt. And I know a lot of people don't like the ending. I did. I think it might have been a bit too abrupt at the very end there. Could have used another epilogue or something. But yeah, I found it to be quite an interesting way to wrap up the story. I also know they made a TV show about it. I've heard it's awful. I've seen some clips of it. It looks awful. I'm not... It does have Hank in it, but that seems to be the only highlight. And also, I find it so funny that the timing of this makes it seem like he ripped off the Simpsons movie. And he didn't. He has addressed this in the past and has even shown evidence that he had been working on a story like this for decades. But still, I find it really funny. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call this one essential Stephen King, especially because it is so long and such a commitment. But if you've already read a lot of his stuff and you're looking for something new, this one was overall pretty great. And while we're on the topic, my sister wanted me to show off a gift she gave me, which was this cool little framed puzzle of a bunch of Stephen King covers. So yeah, it's pretty sick, I have to say. And now his latest book, Fairy Tale. So this book is quite a bit different than Under the Dome. For starters, this is not a horror book. This is absolutely 100% a fantasy book. And it really bugs me how pretty much every bookstore ever puts Stephen King under the horror genre, all of his books. And I understand wanting to be consistent and keeping all of his books in one place, but so many of his books are not horror that I feel like if someone goes to read they want to read a new horror book and they pick this up, they're going to be very confused. But anyway, this story follows Charlie Reed, a high school boy who befriends an old grumpy man who lives on his street, Mr. Bowditch. Yes, after an unfortunate incident that leaves Mr. Bowditch in the hospital, Charlie has to house sit for him and take care of his aging dog Radar. Again, with the character work. Stephen King is an absolute master at this. Charlie and Mr. Bowditch just feel like real people. Despite King being well into his 70s at this point, he can still write fantastic younger characters who really feel like they are that age. But what's interesting about this is it's told in first person through Charlie, and it's actually years later him telling the story, which adds a bit of a unique voice to the storytelling here. Because Charlie's sort of, reflecting on this now as an adult. But yeah, you really bought his friendship with Mr. Bowditch. He's very agoraphobic, he doesn't like people, but once he starts to, open up to Charlie, he was just absolutely delightful. And of course his dog Radar, who forms a very strong connection with Charlie, and it was just super wholesome and great to see their relationship grow. But Mr. Bowditch has a secret. Rather large one. In fact, in the shed in his backyard, there is a portal to another world. And now that Radar, who is very old and very sick, seems like she's on her way out, Charlie learns that in this other world underneath the shed, there may be a way to save her, and he sets off on a journey into the unknown to see if he can do just that. And, charging headfirst into fantasy worlds you know nothing about isn't always the best idea, and he finds himself presented with quite a few challenges that he and Radar need to overcome. So the first, good bit of this book does not take place in the fantasy world. It's just about Charlie's relationship with Mr. Bowditch and Radar. Also Charlie's relationship with his father, who is, say it with me, a recovering alcoholic. Now listen, I know it's kind of a meme how many times Stephen King writes about characters like this. Obviously, it's something he's dealt with in his past before, so he has a lot of that personal experience to put into it. But I never really mind tropes like this that he uses, because he always does them so well, and Charlie's dad was honestly one of my favorite characters. But yeah, the first good bit of this book I found to be absolutely peak Stephen King. It's him doing what he does best, and it was wonderful. And then Charlie goes to the fantasy world. Now, fairy tales obviously are a big theme throughout this story, as Charlie sort of feels like he is in one, and there are a lot of references to other fairy tales. And in a way, the rest of this book sort of does play out like a fairy tale. And when they reference fairy tales, I like how they always bring up, like, you know, all the stories you were told as a kid, you know, the original versions of those. Not so fun. They were quite a bit darker, and of course this is a Stephen King book. This ain't no Disney cartoon. And the world we are presented with here is interesting, and it has some fun, quirky characters, but really, there's not much to it, and it's actually quite a bit jarring going from the start of this book, which had such fantastic characters and this cool sense of mystery, to this rather undeveloped world. And the challenges that Charlie runs into are honestly kind of jarring when they first happen. Like, there's this big shift in the plot at one point, and I kind of started to lose interest in the book because it was so wildly different from anything that was happening. It didn't really feel like a natural progression. It was just like, hey, oh, we're an anime now. So I did think that was a bit awkward. However, once the plot started to get rolling in this other world, I did actually find myself really enjoying this part of the book as well, though albeit not nearly as much. It was pretty fun and enjoyable and entertaining, but there wasn't really much else to it. The characters, and there are a lot of characters that get introduced, don't have nearly as much depth as I usually like from Stephen King characters. Overall, you know, I thought it could have been so much more. Now, like, the very ending of the book, absolutely loved it, but this is sort of the opposite of Under the Dome, where with that one I thought it should have probably been shorter. This one I think could have been quite a bit longer. This honestly could have been his 4th 1,000-pager, and I think it might have turned out better. Like, if this whole fantasy world, which is interesting, the stuff we know about it, was a lot more developed, had way more developed characters, I think this book could have been so much more. But at the end of the day, I still had a blast with it. I didn't like it as much as Under the Dome, probably give it a 3.5, but yeah, I would still recommend it if you're looking for some new King to read, and I hope they don't mess up any future adaptations. There's potential here to make it even better than the book, but we know that's not going to happen. Anyway, that'll do it, and now that I have read Fairy Tale, as I have said, in my next video, and there's actually a special coming up Valentine's Day, but after that, I will be tier ranking every single Stephen King book I have ever read, so I hope you look forward to that. Thank you all so much for watching. You can leave your thoughts on these books in the comments down below, and I'll see you for another video very soon.